So my good friend Chuck wanted me to build him a wheelchair ramp for his in-laws. And so I grabbed Colton, which is right here. And Colton's one of our youth, and we set out to build a wheelchair ramp. Chuck needed this wheelchair ramp for his in-laws because his mother-in-law is wheelchair bound, and therefore it'd be easier for her. That's Chuck right there. Now Chuck is awesome. If you hadn't had the pleasure of meeting Chuck, then that's a shame. Now this right here, this is Charlie. You'll see him running around on the ground while we're working, getting in our way and such. But Charlie, he's a tiny little old dog. If a female in your life's ever left cotton balls laying around that's got makeup all over them, if you glued them together, that's kind of what Charlie looks like. Now Chuck's got a couple other dogs, Colt and LMA. Now they are something else as well. Chuck's got another dog, and you'll see him running around getting in the way, but we won't talk about him just yet. We'll talk about him in a little bit. Now you might be wondering why I am emphasizing Chuck so much. What's the point of this? Why do you care about Chuck and his dogs and his wheelchair ramp? Well, you might not. You might not ever met Chuck. You may never meet Chuck, but I wanted to highlight him and a couple of other things in this video for a couple of reasons. Chuck is an awesome guy. Like I said, if you haven't had the pleasure of meeting Chuck, then you're at a disadvantage because Chuck's a cool dude. He spent 34 years in the military. He served our country in Afghanistan, he went to Kuwait, and he was even in Germany. And while I appreciate and thank him for his service to our country, I thank him even more for the friendship that he's given to me. And me and my wife moved churches and we came to Mount Vernon. Now another awesome opportunity with this wheelchair ramp project was I got to spend time with Colton and teach him some things. Like how it's okay to make mistakes because they're inevitable. As you can see here, poor old Colton, when he was digging the post holes for the posts for the wheelchair ramp, he hit a water line. And so we had to fix that. But what's really cool about the whole thing is life gives you opportunities to teach and to learn. And when you make those mistakes, when you mess up and you have to fix things, you can look at it in two different ways. You can either get upset because you made a mistake and just quit, or you can use the mistake, the failure, as an opportunity to learn how to not make it again in the future. You can use those mistakes as they're intended to teach you and for you to grow and for you to learn how not to do things so that you can do things successfully. And that's one of the cool things about those mistakes. You got to teach Colton, you got to teach kids, you got to teach youth to use their mistakes effectively, to use their mistakes to grow and to progress into manhood and to womanhood and to be who God called them to be. Now that's not to suggest that we should try to make mistakes in order to learn. That's ridiculous. And by the way, that's Chuck's other dog. I think his name's technically Jethro, but we won't say what he usually calls it. But anyway, we don't make mistakes just to learn. That's stupid. This how am I ever going to be old and wise if I'm never young and crazy mentality, that's asinine. That don't make any sense. We don't try to make mistakes to learn. We can learn from the mistakes of others. Actually, we should be encouraged to do that. You should look at the failures of others and learn from them so that you don't make the same mistakes as well. But we are human, and we are inevitably going to make mistakes. It's just going to happen because we're flawed. When we make mistakes, that's when we use them for what they're intended for. If we're going to make mistakes, we might as well use them while we can use them. And that is to learn and to build and to grow and to be better humans and be better Christians, be better men and women for Christ. I've emphasized many times the importance of seeking someone to invest in. That we as adults, we as grown Christians, if you will, men and women of God, we should find someone younger to invest in. We should seek after someone older that will possibly invest in us, but we should also find someone younger to invest in ourselves. And so that is one of the primary purposes of why I do construction. But it gives me a unique opportunity to invest in others. Now, if you've ever worked for any period of time, you'll find that you tend to grow. You tend to get close to the people that you work with because you get mad at each other. You forgive one another, you teach one another, and that builds a relationship. And so that's one of my big goals whenever we do a project like this. Now Colton, he's got a dad. He's got a good dad, and therefore he doesn't necessarily need me to teach him how to be a man because he's got a father that's doing that. But one thing that I have found is that you can't ever have too many good, godly men to influence you. The more men that you have in your life, if you are a man, or the more godly women you have in your life, if you're a woman, to influence you and to help you navigate life, the better you are, the more Christ-like you are, because iron sharpens iron. God created it that way. He created us to be people who grow together. Now, as you can see right here from Colton's dirt pile, Colton did a lot of digging on this project. Now, why would I make him dig? Well, one, I didn't make him do anything. He willingly comes. But there's two reasons why he's doing the digging and I'm not. One, I just didn't want to do the digging. But the other is a young boy needs to be taught hard work. He needs to be taught what it means to work. He needs to get his hands dirty. He needs to get blisters because hard work defines us. It keeps us from being lazy. And sloth, laziness, is a deadly sin. And it is a sin that is plaguing our culture, that is destroying who we are as a country and as a people, because it seems to me, and perhaps I'm just, as I get older, I'm getting to be more ornery, I don't know, but it just seems like there are a larger quantity of people who do not want to work, and that's not biblical. The Bible teaches hard work. The Bible teaches us that men, real men, provide for their families. It teaches us that men who desire to honor Christ, to glorify God, to fulfill their primary purpose in life, are hard workers, are people who do not just rely on other people to provide everything for them. Instead, they are people who work hard in order to sacrifice for others, to put others before themselves, and to work hard for them. Now, I say all that about hard work and how our culture is becoming increasingly lazy to also say that there is hope. Because Colton here is a hard worker. He is a young man that will do anything you tell him to do eagerly. He never once complained about doing all that digging. And so I say that to say that a lot of times we don't give the youth of our day the credit that they're due. A lot of people will say, well, this new generation, they are just lazy. They are worthless. They are the detriment of our society. And that's not good. It's not productive in any way. You're not solving the problem by just stating opinions. Instead, we should, like I said, seek ways to invest in young people. We should find ways to try to disciple them out of their laziness. Be more desirable to them and care more for them. Show them that we care so that when they meet a society, a culture that teaches them and promotes laziness and all kinds of other terrible things and sin and other things that are not Christ-honoring, that they would desire to come out into the cold and to dig and to build a wheelchair ramp because they understand the value of hard work. On a lighter note, again, here's Chuck's other dog. Now, bless his heart, he's super old and doesn't get around as good as the other dogs, and he's constantly in our way, so we tried not to step on him. Now, I normally would not build handrails like this. The best way, the strongest way to give them the most structural integrity is one solid post come up out of the ground through the wheelchair ramp and then put your handrails on them. But Chuck originally did not want handrails and then later decided that he wanted just handrails on just one side. So we just had to adapt and do it a way that I wouldn't normally do it, but it works just fine.
I'm gonna go grab a toboggan.
Well, go grab a toboggan, Chuck.
I'm gonna buy a toboggan. You're about to lose your toboggan. Out of your left pocket.
Oh. Let's just do my Colton's there for a sec. I'm gonna need right where your legs at, Colton. Come down a touch.
There.
Okay. So as we've already said, it's important to find someone to invest in, but it's also important to find someone who will invest in you. And the key to that is to find someone who cares. And that's really the key for both aspects of it. The reason I bring Colton along with me is because Colton cares. He wants to know how to do these things. He wants to know how to build a wheelchair ramp. And therefore, I am more than happy to teach him the things that I know about building a wheelchair ramp. But not only that, Colton also understands what I'm doing. He understands that I'm trying to invest in him. And so he wants to be invested in. He wants to grow. He wants to progress as a man in this world. And so he is more than happy to listen and to learn. It's important that we, as older Christians, and by older, I don't mean really old, I'm only 25, but what I mean is older than the person that we're trying to invest in. It's important that we live lives of integrity, because that's how we find an audience to invest in. If you are not a person of integrity, don't expect people to want to listen to you and get your advice on things and to learn from you, because there's nothing for them to learn. They don't want to. People don't need to know better ways to sin and be flawed humans. We do that perfectly fine on our own. Instead, humans need people who are inspired by the Holy Spirit to teach others and to help people progress through this life. And so, as people who are looking for others to invest in, it's important that we find someone who actually wants to be invested in. But it's just as equally important to be a person of integrity, someone whom is qualified to lead others. Now that doesn't mean that I'm perfect. I'm not. So like I've said many times, there's nothing special about me that is going to necessarily help Colton or help any of the other youth. But I am someone who I feel has been called by God to help young people. And so what I try to be a man, an honest man, a man of integrity, a man led by the Holy Spirit, and to help as much as I can and to teach as much as I can to those who were younger than me. That maybe, just as Paul said when he said to imitate himself, I can live a life that others can imitate. I can live a life that is a life of integrity because of the Holy Spirit, not because of me, but because of what Christ has done for me. And because of what Christ has done for me and to me, He can also use me as a tool to shape Colton, to shape other young men. When we are trying to find someone who will invest in us, we need to also look for someone who cares. We need to keep in mind that for every one person that does care about us, there are millions upon millions of people on this planet that do not care about you and me. Now, for the vast majority of those people, it's just because they don't know us. But even people that we do know, a small percentage of them actually care about you and me. And that's not to be depressing, it's just reality. Human beings are naturally selfish. Selfishness is something that we overcome through the blood of Christ. And so we have to keep in mind that when we meet other people, the likelihood of them being selfish and not caring about us is quite high. And so we have to find people who do care. If you try to get someone to invest in you that does not care about you, then it will lead to only disappointment. Whereas if you find someone who does care about you, and trust me, there are plenty of people out there that care, and they're looking for someone to invest in. They are good, godly men and women who seek to find someone whom they can disciple. And so we have to look for those people. We have to find those people, and we have to ask them to take an interest in us. We have to follow them. We have to, in some shape, form, or fashion, live with them. I don't mean to move in with them unless that's necessary, but to just spend time with those people, because those people shape us. God uses other men and women to shape us into what He wants us to be. And that only comes through people who care. It also comes through people whom the Holy Spirit has called to do so. What that means is that those who are going to invest in you and me are people who have been called to do so by the Holy Spirit. If they haven't, then you're wasting your time and theirs, because we have to be people that are led by the Spirit. And if we are, then what we'll find is that we tend to stay within the center of God's will. And if we don't, we will find that we constantly try to do things on our own, and for the vast majority of the time, we are disappointed for it. So this wheelchair ramp project was a win-win, because one, I got to help out Chuck, but more so I got to hang out with Chuck, and also in the process I got to, in some small capacity, invest in Colton, and to glean the wisdom of Chuck Decker. And then finally, get to share it with you fine folks. So if you've stuck with us here to the end, here's the moral of the whole story. The moral of the whole story, again, is, are you a disciple maker? If you're a Christian, you've been called to be. And so what we as Christians have to do is we have to find someone who cares about our investment in them, and do all that we can do and find ways to invest in them. And then we must also find ways to grow as Christians by allowing someone else to sharpen us. Someone who cares. Someone who wants to invest in you. Someone who has similar interests and desires and looks to improve you as a disciple of Jesus Christ. This is the Sunday Renaissance Man. Thank you for watching. Y'all take it easy.